I'm back. It's been about 5 minutes since I made the last video. Actually, that's not true. Uh, this is part two of our state and local public finance segment on other taxes. And as I mentioned, we're going to try to figure out a way to get this to you all, part one and part two. Right now, we're toying with the idea of a YouTube channel, but we'll see how that works. Last episode, we discussed excise taxes. Today we're going to talk about, or this segment, we're going to talk about a couple of other taxes. Number one, severance taxes. And we talked about severance taxes in class at one or two times. And severance taxes I find them incredibly interesting. They're just not super important from a revenue standpoint in most states. So I'm going to go back to my census figures here, and I will tell you the severance tax nationwide in 2018, that's the latest numbers I have, were $12.6 billion. I mean, that's nothing. I mean, it really is nothing. There are some states where these numbers are much greater. I think North Dakota, interestingly, has the highest percentage. North Dakota raises about $2 billion of that $12 billion. And I think they have the highest reliance on severance taxes of any state. So generally how they work, and we've discussed this before, is they are a extraction tax for taking natural resources out of the ground. And so the first one, if memory serves, was in Michigan with respect to copper taxes. And that was in the mid-1800s. And usually they are imposed on coal. So Wyoming raises a lot of money. Montana raises a lot of money. Natural gas, oil. We all know about Alaska. Texas raises a lot of excise taxes on oil and natural gas. Louisiana, same thing. But mostly it is non. You'll have to excuse me. My dog is behind me, and he is making all kinds of noise, and I don't know how to shut this off. And you might have seen something move behind me. That was my daughter finding the dog. My apologies. That's just the way we're going to have to do this. Sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah, severance taxes. Usually non-renewable resources, oil, gas, natural gas, and any mineral, right? So we impose excise taxes on coal, on gold, on silver, on bauxite, on titanium, on copper. In a lot of states, especially Arizona, has a pretty sizable copper excise tax revenue base. At least they traditionally have. I haven't checked the numbers in a while. But severance taxes, I think, are interesting because the idea behind them originally, and we may have mentioned this in class at one point, the idea behind them originally was that these are natural resources underneath the ground in the state, so they belong to the people of the state. Right there, they are not specific to a geographic site, right? Say you own a square mile of land in Montana. Well, the coal you mine under that goes in multiple directions beyond your property line. And the idea was, if you're mining coal in Montana or wherever, you are taking a natural resource from all the people. So the idea of the severance tax was that we'd impose a tax, and then we would put it in a trust fund, and it would be a asset for society forevermore. Of course, that's almost naive to think that that would work, certainly in hindsight, and it didn't, right? So, at some point, states said, wow, we have this bunch of money over here, we need to spend more money, why raise other taxes, just use this. And that became a very standard thing. So if you think about the states that are missing one of the major taxes, like Texas, no income tax, Wyoming, no income tax, Montana, no sales tax, Alaska, no sales or income tax. Many of those states, not all of them, but many of those states rely on severance taxes to some extent, certainly more than most states. So that's all, it's interesting. It just doesn't raise that much money. Some states impose excise taxes on renewable products. So there's fishing excise taxes on fish harvest. There are timber is actually the biggest one. So you cut down trees, pay a tax. Theoretically, they replant the trees, so it's kind of a recurring event. But I don't know. I have to tell you, I find it super interesting, and yet not particularly important. I just found my list. The states with the highest dependence on severance taxes are North Dakota, as I mentioned, Texas, Washington, which tends to be more timber, West Virginia, which tends to be coal, Wyoming, which tends to be coal, Montana, which tends to be coal, New Mexico, which I think is a variety of different minerals, Louisiana, which is oil, Kentucky, which is coal. I think that's the top 10. But you could, I think this is actually in the textbook and in a couple of other, you can find that easily on the census page. The last thing I'm going to mention about severance taxes is that you can export the tax burden through severance taxes. So, right, if you want other people to pay your taxes, this is a good way to do it. The famous case, and we discussed this case, I think, in class when we were talking about constitutional limitations, is the case out of Montana and Commonwealth Edison versus Montana, if I recall correctly. But you can look that case up on Wikipedia online. And basically, Montana had a very high coal severance tax. 99% of all the coal in Montana was exported. Most of it, at least during this time, went to Illinois. And Montana was basically providing the power for electricity in the state of Illinois, and in that metro area, probably Milwaukee as well, and northern Indiana. And the severance tax was passed on to the miners paid it. The mining companies paid the tax because when you extract the mineral, that's where the tax kicks in, right? That's why it's called a severance tax. And then the mining companies, of course, sell it to electric companies, utility companies, and that becomes part of the utilities' cost of goods sold, basically, and that's what the utilities use that as part of their costs, and pass that on to their customers in the form of higher prices. So people in Chicago pay the Montana coal severance tax. The problem with, and I'll mention this, and we talked about this earlier in the semester. The problem with exporting tax burdens, and believe me, politicians love to do this. The problem with it is it creates this big, giant fiscal illusion, right? You get more government than you're willing to pay for, and that's a terrible way to run your government. But I'm editorializing now, and I usually do that only in person, but now I'm doing it on YouTube or whatever the heck I'm on. Finally, the last even relatively sizable tax to talk about, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going in and out here. The last relatively sizable tax to talk about is the estate tax and gift tax, death taxes, as conservatives like to call them, wealth transfer taxes, basically taxes that occur at the time of death. I have very strong feelings about this, and I think we talked about it in class. This is one of those taxes that doesn't work very well at the state level, and it has nothing to do with politics or my policy preferences or anything like that. I will never pay an estate tax. That's why I'm teaching here. My family has been neither blessed with great fortunes nor cursed with great poverty. We're pretty middle class. Middle class people don't pay estate taxes. However, I'm telling you, as a policy analyst, tax doesn't work. My liberal friends love the tax because they think you're sticking it to the rich, and this is a way you can redistribute wealth. My personal experience and experiences of lots of tax lawyers and estate tax lawyers I know, and a lot of other people, is tax doesn't raise much money because there's just too many ways around it. If you're going to redistribute wealth, you got to do it at the federal level. It's almost impossible to do at the state level. So, what do we know about the one thing you should know? Let me see if I can find the dollar numbers on the estate tax these days. Death and gift taxes here. Death and gift taxes, this will tell you, in the United States in 2018, at the state level, $5 billion. Right? That's lunch money. I mean, that's the fact that we have it and we pay people to administer it and pay people to worry about it is ridiculous. And the biggest problem with it, the single biggest problem with the tax is that people move in anticipation of death when you have an estate tax. And this is documented, and it is both anecdotally and from a public finance perspective. People move, and that's why you only raise $5 billion. Right? The base is far greater than that. The potential is far, far greater than that. But people move. And especially, there's two kinds of moves. One, a lot of people move to Florida, which doesn't have an estate tax, and then everybody says, "Oh, well, the weather's better in Florida," and that's true. They also don't have an income tax, but you don't have to move that far, right? So if Virginia doesn't have an estate tax, and rich folks in D.C. move to Northern Virginia all the time. And that's why D.C. collects almost no money from its estate tax. They collect a couple of $1 million. And it's usually unwitting, unknowing old people who die before they have a plan. But that's not a way to bank on the system. Now, I get from a political standpoint, there's a serious question about income inequality and wealth inequality and all that other stuff. And again, that's not my issue. I think that if you're going to do that, it's got to be done at the federal level. All right. So the federal government has an estate tax. the other weird thing. So what we have at the state level is we have there's I think 14 states that still have an estate tax, where when you die, it is the estate that's paying it. But there's, I think, and this may be in the book, and I don't have the book in front of me, and I apologize. It's easy enough to find out. There's, I think there's 5 or 6 states that actually have an inheritance tax. I know Pennsylvania still has one. I think Kentucky may still have one as well, where if I die and I leave you money, you pay the tax on the amount that I left you in the state. Lots of ways around that, and the problem is with the inheritance tax is poor people pay it because there's not a lot of exemptions. Rich people find a way around it, but poor people pay it, and that sucks, personally. Okay, I'm going to stop now because it took a long time to download that last video. I'm going to call this session over. Here's what I want you to do. For non-taxes, feel free. Feel free to email me at any time. I will happily jump on a phone call with you to talk about this segment or any other segment or anything that happened during the semester. Happily talk to you in person, or we can communicate via email. More importantly, well, not more importantly. Next week we're going to do two other. I'm going to send 2 videos on non-tax revenue. Again, that's going to be intergovernmental aid, gambling, and user fees. Maybe some other stuff, but those are the main ones. And then we're going to do a couple of sessions on the property tax, and then we're basically going to be over. Most importantly, stay safe, follow the rules, don't be dumb. You guys aren't dumb, you guys are smart. But a lot of dumb people out there, watch them. Stay safe, and I'm going to say goodbye now.